Hey everyone, welcome to part two of tonight's Dan and Joe Sports Show. As always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.
All right, Joe, we're going to look at a philosophical review of how this unregulated transfer portal and the opt outs have affected college football from what we had. Joe, when the opt out thing started about 5 years ago, Christian McCaffrey is the first one that I really remember opting out of the bowl game. Now, you saw certain things like I kind of felt like who's the really great defensive lineman for South Carolina that lit up the quarterback from Michigan?
Jadeveon Clowney.
Jadeveon Clowney, I felt like more or less opted out his last season. You didn't see him that much. Leonard Fournette, his junior year at Ole Miss, if you can even call it a junior year at LSU, he opted out, I think, of that season for the most part and only played in games that really mattered to him. So there was a little bit of that starting. And then, of course, it's morphed to people skipping seasons like Jamar Chase skipping out in his junior year at LSU to prepare for the draft. And it's kind of gone on and on. And, of course, it got bad last year of the pandemic. And then now when you watch these bowl games, I mean, if you see a game that's not a college football playoff game, odds are you're going to see some people opting out. And even when we're talking about Rose Bowls right now, I mean, Ohio State had their two best receivers, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, opt out of the Rose Bowl. And, of course, Matt Corral ended up not opting out of the Sugar Bowl and got injured, but, he was applauded for doing this, which just a few years ago, you wouldn't even think that someone would consider opting out of a Sugar Bowl.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a situation where college football is at a crossroads as far as what's going to happen going forward. You feel like it's going to get worse before it gets better until they expand the playoff. And to your point, you're still probably going to see players that are rising juniors like Jamar Chase last year opt out of the season or play in select games if they think they're going to be a high draft pick. And if you see, the success that Chase has had this year in the NFL with the Bengals, you can't completely fault them for doing that. But I feel like, it's a difficult situation because there's a lot of thoughts I have on it. Like the big thought I'd say first and foremost is when you have this kind of revolving door of opt-outs and with players transferring in the transfer portal is kind of becoming a college basketball problem where like you can't keep up with these teams anymore. Like it's like a revolving door of new players every year. Like I miss the days of knowing like who's going to be on the team for 3 or 4 years. You get to know the players and bond with the players. And we're just kind of missing that.
Well, Joe, let me give you a great example. A game that when it first got announced, I was like, man, that is exciting. Like what a good matchup. What a great reward for two teams that had a season that probably no one was really expecting and kind of came out of nowhere. And one of which won their conference for the first time, probably ever. I think they've been in the championship game, but had never won it. The other one had a season where they thought it was so good that they, I would say foolishly, threw $95 million at their coach. And I'm talking about the Michigan State in Pittsburgh game. I was really excited when that first came out. I'm like, great, I get to see Kenneth Walker in his last game going against Kenny Pickett. And, of course, both of the stars, the reason that I would care about that game, opted out. Kenny Pickett doesn't play, and then Kenneth Walker doesn't play. And it destroyed, in my mind, what was a game that I thought was really interesting. And after that, didn't really interest me that much.
No, absolutely. And here's a couple of things that's puzzling to me about these opt-outs. You'll see some of these guys, like think about Kenneth Walker. Michigan State was pretty much eliminated from the Big Ten, I think, with a couple of weeks to go in the regular season. And so he plays the last couple of games, which were technically meaningless in the grand scheme of things with the playoff, but yet you opt out of New Year's Six Bowl. So I find that a little bit contradictory. And then second, what I find puzzling is how players on these teams are so okay with these guys opting out. Like, they're obviously opting out so they don't risk injury, but yet they're expecting their teammates to risk injury by playing in these games. And so I just don't quite understand that stance.
Well, in my mind, too, like I said, if you're Kenny Pickett, Pittsburgh has never won a New Year's Six game. So you're opting out of the opportunity to do something that your team has never done before. And that's what we talked about earlier with Corral. I mean, Corral played so they could give Ole Miss their first 11-win season. And someone that's been around Pittsburgh as long as he has, I think Kenny Pickett was like a sixth-year senior. you'd have expected him to care enough to want to do that for his team. I'm not saying he's a bad player that doesn't care about football or any of that kind of stuff, but it just surprises me with him especially that he would opt out of that game. And then he's going to play in the Senior Bowl this year. So in my mind, how are you going to opt out of a New Year's Six game but then go play in the Senior Bowl? It's nonsensical.
Yeah, that's contradictory rhetoric there with that position. And I mean, I think you and I both could say personally, like, let's say, like our last semester of our senior year of college, we just decided to opt out and not be a student, not enjoy being on campus that last semester. To me, you're just missing out on life. And I'm telling you, these guys are going to look back on this, especially if some of these players, are busts in the NFL. Yeah, they may get a lot of money, but you can't put a price tag on some of these experiences. And I guarantee you some of these guys are going to say, I sure wish I had played in that Peach Bowl.
Or just think about the Rose Bowl right there. Jackson Smith and Jigba has the game of his life and gets 330 yards. And meanwhile, Garrett Wilson and Olave are sitting on the bench. You don't think that they were having some urges thinking, man, I would have loved to have caught another touchdown pass at the Rose Bowl. And I don't know that they had gotten to play in that game since they had been there because Ohio State kept making the playoff. That would probably might have actually been their first chance to play in what would be a real Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I mean, there's some traditionalists, that would put the Rose Bowl as important like as any type of football game. I mean, like, playing in the Rose Bowl versus even like a playoff Cotton Bowl, like the Rose Bowl is a nice destination.
It is. I mean, and you saw how much Utah cared about that game. They even made special helmets that had roses in them and shirts that had it. The Utah people were excited to be there. And I thought that was a really fun game, for them because they didn't opt out that much. Mm-hmm. And, even going to that Auburn game at the end right there, I mean, it was a poor effort, but their best players on defense. I mean, Roger McCreary opted out. So it's a little bit more understandable when you're at a game like the Birmingham Bowl. It's not as exciting. But in my mind, why did Jacoby McLean opt out? He's like a 5th-round draft pick. It doesn't even make sense. I mean, if you're a guy like Roger McCreary is going to be a top 20 draft pick, he's earned his way up there. If he wants to opt out, I get it. I still would want to play in the last game, but I understand it a little bit more. But, yeah, when you're talking about Kenny Pickett and Kenneth Walker are the worst examples in my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was certainly frustrating to see that matchup go from, great to just a total bust. And, going back to kind of like the transfer portal, like that's the other part, where the sport's at crossroads. And I heard somebody say this week something interesting about the transfer portal I had not really considered. You already think about the player movement and how it pretty much becomes, like you said, free agency in college football. But I've heard people talking about the, possibility, and this is already happening, we know, you're going to see players that don't even intend to really transfer supposedly enter the portal to use it as leverage for a higher NIL deal. So, like, that's going to happen.
Oh, that's definitely going to happen. Joe, before I get into that, I want to round out this thing with the opt-outs and then kind of go into the transfer portal a little bit too. We saw a team last night who got deadly affected by both of them. LSU never should lose a game to Kansas State by 3 touchdowns. And by the way, Joe, that's 3 touchdowns, them putting up 2 trash touchdowns in the last 5 minutes of that game, including a trick play on the last play of the game to make it a 3-touchdown game. LSU had to use a wide receiver at quarterback because Max Johnson had transferred. Nussmeier didn't want to burn his red shirt. I think Miles Brennan is still hurt. And then they had, of course, TJ Finley had transferred the year before. So they had no quarterbacks. They had to have a wide receiver play quarterback for them. And they only had 37 scholarship players because they had so many people opted out. I mean, and so credit to LSU for playing the game. They didn't find some kind of reason to say, hey, we had COVID affect us and they didn't play the game. But, I mean, they were a shell of themselves. And that's what you can see that can happen because of this. And now we're going into the transfer portal. And something I heard today that I really like is that I think that if we're going to make the system the way it is now, why don't you set a deadline to where you can transfer? It has to be after the season. You can't have any more of these in-season transfers, people sitting out. And you know what? Why don't you go ahead and make it to where head coaches can't leave when they want to either, that they have to wait to the end of the season, and then go ahead and get rid of the early signing day and move it back to February where it's supposed to. And that would solve so many issues if you just did that. All right, so January 11th is the end of the season, right? That's the last game of the year is on the 10th. So whatever the day is that you have that, the day after is a day that a coach can leave. Someone can transfer out if they want to. And then you have a period until signing day to do it. And then you have signing day back to where it is. And that would solve so much of the things that are really affecting this game and frankly making it less likable, a little bit disgusting. I mean, it really would really improve what we have right now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great point because you think about with like the transfer portal, like think about how transfers used to be like 15 years ago. Like it was notable if a player was a big time transfer. Like I remember getting excited when Jevin Sneed transferred from Texas to Ole Miss and had to sit out a year. And you're like, okay, awesome. This is your quarterback in 2 years. And, you would see teams get JUCO quarterbacks. You think about Cam Newton coming to Auburn or Chad Kelly coming to Ole Miss. Like, those kind of stories stood out. But then now, like, you just can't keep up with it anymore. And like I said earlier, the teams change so much. And now you have players going from, like, different schools in the same conference, like Max Johnson going from LSU to A&M. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's so hard to keep up with now.
Well, and then now it's even worse when you got somebody like Dylan Gabriel that transfers from UCF to UCLA. And 2 weeks later, because Caleb Williams says he's going in the transfer portal for Oklahoma, Dylan Gabriel was like, psych, Chip Kelly. I was just kidding about me coming out to California. I'm going to go to Oklahoma instead. Thanks for having me over there. I mean, if you're Oklahoma right there, how do you really take this kid seriously? I mean, in my mind, Dylan Gabriel's a good player. Don't get me wrong. He's done a lot of good things. But to me, like, that's just terrible. Like, I don't take you don't seem like you have a lot of commitment to a team. It's all about you.
Yeah, it's not a good look. He had also considered Ole Miss as well. So thank goodness he didn't arrive on Ole Miss's campus and change his mind. Like that would really, I think, depressed us. Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult situation. And something's just got to change. I just don't think this can permanently continue because it's just going to get worse.
It's going to get worse. And now Caleb Williams has made it even worse now because what he's done is he's put himself in the transfer portal, not so that he can go somewhere else, but so he can get the highest bid. And that he hasn't even hit it. That's what it's all about is, are you going to give the best environment for B2B in the pros, and are you going to give me the best NIL deal? And you know what? I'm not going to fault him. Obviously, he's got a system right now, and he's using it the way he wants to. But that's what it is now. And there's going to be a lot of other people that do the exact same thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got, the bowl system where every game that's not the playoff is almost viewed like the NIT. And you've got, free agency with the transfer portal. I mean, do you think that they'll always have this one-time freebie for the transfer portal, or could you see at some point them going back to having to sit out a year?
I don't know, Joe. I mean, at this point, I feel like they've almost opened the floodgates so much. I don't know how you close them now because, I mean, they had the problems they had with the 1 year thing is they were inconsistent on when they had the waiver. You would be like, oh, wait. You can't transfer to this school because your mom's sick because it's not 100 miles from where you live. It's 150 miles from where you live. But someone made a comment to you that you found offensive. Yeah, you can leave. That's fine. I mean, they weren't consistent with the way they did it. And so, I mean, they're really going to go back to that. I just don't really see how they can justify moving that system back that way. And I mean, I almost feel like at this point that you need to maybe have contracts of some sort saying you can't do it. Like if you're going to get this NIL deal, then you have to stay with the school for a year because otherwise, I mean, everyone's going to start doing what Caleb Williams is doing and it's going to destroy the game.
It does. And you think about how everybody has this extra year of eligibility with COVID. If players are getting paid in college, who's not to say that we're not on a track, especially with the coaches making all this money, where college football almost becomes like a competitive professional league to the NFL. I mean, it's reaching that point with people getting compensated.
Yeah, it is. And someone, said this earlier is that it's even worse than the NFL because at least the NFL is regulated. This is when you can be taken off the waiver wires. This is when you can go to a different team. They can just leave whenever they want. I can be playing for Auburn. I'd be like, hi, Harsin, I'm gone. I'm going to Alabama. I'll just go next door right now because I've got a free transfer thing. They called me the other day and I decided I'd rather be with them. And it's just that simple. It's not like, you have to wait till the end of the year. You have to wait till the end of your contract. Now it's just wide open. Caleb Williams decides, well, you know what? I don't have Lincoln Riley anymore. I don't know whether I like Oklahoma. I guess I like Oklahoma okay, but why don't I see if Oklahoma will give me the best deal or if someone else will give me the best deal? And I'm just out here for the taking right now.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely.
And then Dylan Gabriel can say, oh, I'm going to UCLA. Just kidding. 2 weeks later, better offers out there. I'm going to go ahead and move. I already moved from South Florida to LA, maybe. Now I'm going to go from LA all the way to Oklahoma.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, part of Oklahoma's deal for Dylan Gabriel is they pay for his moving costs.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a slippery slope with so many different implications. And like one observation I've made when it comes to not just college sports, but like professionally, all the player movement that we see, like players in professional sports didn't used to change teams as much as they do. And when you're seeing it so much in college and in professional sports, it's almost like it makes it hard to like root for your team. Like you almost have to like follow players more than you do like a specific school or team.
No, that's exactly what it's like. I mean, and you know what? I mean, if you want to expand the playoff, that's good. I hope they do. But if this is really the way it is, the haves are going to have an even bigger separation from the have-nots.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're not going to see any more Cincinnatis in the playoffs.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. Like you're almost going to have like, a break off as I think we've talked about before with the group of five.
Yeah, that's going to be what it is. And it's sad, but, we'll see if there's anything they can do to solve it. But the problem is that they're not all moving as one right now. They can't even agree on whether they want to move it from a 4-team to an 8-team to a 12-team because there is no, czar of college football. There is no leader of it. It's just all these people representing conferences, representing their own interests that all have opposing interests that never agree on anything. So how are they going to agree on rules? They're going to fix this because they're always going to find some opposing interest that messes it up and they're not going to agree to anything. I mean, it's almost like you created in college football what we have right now with Democrats and Republicans. They don't agree on anything. They don't get anything done in the U.S. And that's essentially where you're at now with college football. So they're not going to fix any of these issues.
No, I'm afraid not. And like the last thing I'll say on it, I heard Kirk Herbstreit say in an interview last year that like what's changed about college football is everything's just so predicated on winning championships now. And obviously everybody wants to, but like the sport has become about a bracket and not so much about like celebrating what's a good season, based on the school that we're talking about. Like I talked about with Ole Miss earlier, potentially getting to an 11-2 season and winning the Sugar Bowl. Like you go back, through the years, if you went like is a certain program, depending on who you were, like 8-4 in 1-year bowl game, you could celebrate your season. Like there was a reason to applaud that. Sometimes even like a 7-6 season with a particular school. You didn't have to win a national championship to celebrate. But now everything's predicated on that. And we just don't, celebrate the sport the way we used to.
Right. I'll give you an example, Joe. Previously, and I'd like to have him back on again, we had Junior Rosegreen on the show. Great football player for Auburn, a cornerback who played in the NFL. And I actually saw that he just got a defense coordinator job at a high school in Florida. So I'd like to get him on and talk to him about that. But I had him on because he played against Penn State in the Citrus Bowl the year before Auburn went undefeated in 2004 and didn't get into the championship game, the BCS championship, that I think was the real start of the idea for a 4-team playoff. But the year before that, they had all the talent in the world, were preseason number 1, struggled, lost some games they shouldn't have, were 8-4, and they went and played a top 8 Penn State team in the Citrus Bowl with a great running back, and they held him to Larry Johnson. They held Larry Johnson to under 50 yards in that game. They beat Penn State in like just an old-fashioned drag them out 13-9 game. That win propelled them in the offseason to having that legendary 2004 season where they went undefeated and had, in what my mind was, the greatest football team ever at Auburn. And I really think that win against a great Penn State team did that for them. And at the end of that season, even though Auburn was preseason number 1, them winning that Citrus Bowl gave us a lot of hope for the future, and that made that season a lot more bearable and a good season too.
Yes. You take away the possibility of building that momentum, with the win. Like we saw that a little bit in the bowl season. You saw like Oklahoma and Clemson winning their bowl games. You're like, okay, maybe that's going to galvanize them, but we just don't see that kind of thing enough. And I just don't think at the end of the day, when you compare college football to college basketball and college baseball, in college basketball and baseball, like anybody can technically win. Like you see Cinderellas make it to the Final Four. You see the Coastal Carolinas win the College World Series or Fresno State. That's just not going to happen in football with the way the sport is played. And so you're taking away, the possibility for like the mid-majors, the group of fives to really have a celebrated season if everything is based on a bracket.
That's right, Joe. I mean, the team that won the College World Series last year, if you only had 4 teams that could have made it, Mississippi State wouldn't have made it. And they ended up being, going away the best team at the end of the year. And, of course, the team that they should have played, NC State, wouldn't have been there either. And that was a great Cinderella story, which you really hated seeing them not get that opportunity because of COVID. But at least, everyone can take solace that Vanderbilt didn't win at all, because that just would have felt really bad.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
All right, Joe, with that being said, we'll look in at these Blue Bloods playing each other in our next segment, and we'll talk Bama, Georgia, part 2 and the championship, and then part 2 this season. And as always, I'm Dan.
And I'm Joe.